what we're going to do is start by introducing, because you're looking going, who are these ladies? Who are these ladies? Well, again, this year we wanted to try and bring some different voices. We didn't just want to choose. In the past, we've had a lot of our own One Hope women. This year, God dropped these women into my spirit and some other team members' spirit, because we believe that God has given each of them something really special and something really unique to share today. So we're going to start down the end and we're going to just do a few intros. So over to you, Julie.
G'day. This is great. Firstly, hi, I'm Julie Rock. What do you want, Nick? Who am I? The lowdown, where I come from. So, married to one husband, which is always great in this culture. Mum of 4 sons. Dave and I pastor at Church by the Bay in Port Arlington. So I know there are some of my crew here today. Thanks, guys, for supporting us here at Bloom. And this is my maybe 4th or 5th time at Bloom, I think. Yeah.
Great. So would you like to pass your mic along now and we'll get the beautiful Bridie to introduce herself too?
Hello, I'm Bridie Spicer. Disclaimer, I sat out in the sun during lunch and following Nicole's advice, I currently have tissues in my armpits. So if they fall out, I'm not stuffing my bra. It's like...
I told her that you should stuff your bra. Stuffing your bra is fine.
I was living in Melbourne and I was on staff for Bridge Church, formerly, some of you would probably know it as Richmond AOG, for about 10 years, young adults pastor, and then one of the executive pastors there. And at the end of last year, we relocated and we're now living down in Torquay. So I have an 18-month-old little boy and a 3.5-year-old little girl. I think there was some photos. Did you already see them? Nicole asked me yesterday for a photo and I'm like, oh, I don't have any. So I attempted. I don't know if they're coming up or not, but... yeah, and so obviously I have kids, so I'm married too. So that was my attempt. It went really well. We're an Instagram family, as you can tell, and my son's nappy was full of poo and falling off him at that moment. Pretty glamorous. So clearly we need more family photos if anyone's a photographer and wants to sponsor.
Thanks, Bridie. That's great. And Mel, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would. I just wish that we were sharing with a spirit of honesty here, ladies, but anyway. So my name is Mel Lovell and I'm a One Hope woman. I'm relatively new though, over the past couple of years. I was attending a church in Melbourne. The associate pastor there was a woman who, she was quite challenging in some ways. In fact, some of you may have met her, Kim Smith. Came to Geelong thinking we'd have a fresh start. What do you know? Anywho, it's not my fault that she couldn't live without us. So that's my family on the... there was my family on the screen. I have husband Gareth and 2 little girls, and I'm delighted to be here to share with you today.
Thanks, guys. It's wonderful to have you here, and we know that you're going to share something really powerful. Now, today we're going to try something a little bit new and exciting as well. We're going to have a Q&A session. So you're going to see up on the screens a phone number come up and some information. And what we would really love for you to do is, throughout the panel, if there's any questions that come up that you would like to specifically ask any of our panellists today, we would like you to text it in. Make sure you let us know who the question is for, and we can try. Obviously, there's a lot of women in the room. We may not cover all questions, but I think there's a real sense of honesty and vulnerability here this year, and I would say be real, ask the questions. And I know that these women, we've spent some time together, and I'm sure they'll be really open and ready to answer the questions that you have. So you can see the number up there on the screen, and like I said, just who your question is for, so we make sure that we direct it to the right person. So Julie, would you like to go first? And could you start by telling us a little bit about how you've experienced the joy of the Lord being your strength, and particularly focusing on the area of parenting?
Sure. So as I've been reflecting on this, I really think God has an incredible sense of humour, because having 4 sons in a very short space of time like 5 years with no twins, one after the other. 2, yeah, I know, right? I know, look at them. Aren't they cute? They are not bundles of joy, okay? They were not bundles of joy. That's the Instagram photo. I know I probably should have brought the other one where they're hitting each other, climbing all over each other. So that's on this end here, that's Daniel, Caleb in the middle, Reuben in the second one from the end, and then Josh on the other end. And because we're in Geelong and our kids have all gone to school at Christian College, I do apologise in advance to anyone who has been on the receiving end of a horrible, nasty word from any of my children. I'm so sorry. I apologise to their teachers that are present here today. I'm so sorry. It's having 4 kids. Oh, there we are. That's us now. Yeah. Did that one go up? Yeah. Me, the short stuff in the front. They're all like, that's my husband Dave there at the back. So having 4 kids in 5 years, I think, was God's way of kind of teaching me how to do this motherhood thing, because I would never have chosen it to be that way. So exactly what Kim shared with us this morning, I had this like straight path and this is the way it was going to be, and it didn't go like that, okay? It went like that and back again in multiple directions. And so anywhere we went, it was a bit like a cyclone, really. It's the only way I can describe my life with little children. We have had lots of discussions about poo, lots of discussions about why we don't hit each other as the only way to solve a problem. How to, all the normal things like throwing tantrums and all of that kind of stuff. And please don't call the authorities, but I have been known to lock them all out of the house at some point as a survival technique while I'm inside the house, or vice versa, lock them in and I go out. I have also been known to leave them on the side of the road and drive off. And while they were there, I made them pick up rubbish. And I have done the whole hide in the closet thing with the tea towel over your head just so you can try and find some space in your day to pray. And so, you know how Kim was talking yesterday about that decluttering lady who's, does this spark joy for you and you should put it in the keep pile? If not, get rid of it. Get rid of them all. They did not spark joy for me. It was not joyful at that particular season of my life. However, having said all of that, I often had people say, I'd say I've got 4 boys, and have a guess what their response was? Oh, you poor thing. They were correct. However, can I just say, if you do come across somebody that has all boys, please do not say that. It is one of the most condemning things as a mum, where you go, oh, I just don't cut it, do I? Because I don't have any girls, I only have boys. It was a really big thing that contributed to my lack of joy in my parenting. So Nicole asked us just to speak about a brief story. So I wanted to share something that happened in the year 2000 when I was pregnant with Reuben, our 3rd son. Dave had planned a trip. We had planned a trip to Thailand with our young adults that we were working with at Eltham Baptist at the time. And unfortunately, due to the timing, I discovered that I was pregnant and therefore couldn't go on the trip, which added to a great heavy sense of resentment that I had towards motherhood and being a mum. And so Dave went off on the trip with the young adults and I stayed home with the 2 children, fully pregnant, feeling like an Oompa Loompa in the middle of summer, and I went and stayed with my parents for the whole time he was gone, which was, I think, roughly around 2 weeks. In that time, I can remember sitting in my bedroom, sitting up on my bed. I can remember with my head against the wall just going, God, how on earth am I going to do this parenting thing? Like, this is just my worst nightmare, having all of these little children so close together. I feel so ill-equipped to be their mum. What on earth are you doing, Lord? was my question. And I can remember sitting there thinking, okay, well, there's only one way out of this, really. And I've got to have this baby. And if I'm going to have this baby, then I have to find a way to enjoy this role that is parenting. And so I found myself kneeling down on the side of the bed on the floor, and I just said to God, all right, God, if this is my path, then I submit. I submit my heart to this journey. I submit my heart to this road. I submit my heart to this life that I am now leading, being a mother of, which we then knew was another boy. And so really that was, for me, the beginning of joy in my motherhood, because what I realised was joy was not about the feeling. Joy was not about being happy. Joy was not about having all my ducks in a row and being excited and being, oh wow, I'm having another baby. Wonderful, isn't it exciting? And oh, delightful. No, it was the hard yards of having to learn to obey my Lord. And that is the way God taught me, by giving me 4 wonderful bundles of joy. And so for me, joy became about building faith in my life as opposed to building a feeling of joy. And so joy was more about that steadfast, deep understanding of submission and surrender as I partnered with God in his calling on my life.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah. Thanks for your honesty there, because I think obviously there's different people in the room and we all bring different experiences. And I know there's some people that may be desperate to be a parent and, you know, they're going through that journey and there's this expectation that, oh, you know, this is what it's going to be like. And sometimes it's not like that. And sometimes, you know, new mums can really struggle through things that we're not even aware of. So to know you knew where to turn with that, which was to surrender and allow God to be the answer, that's when you started to move forward. Because we're really open to know that we're not all at the same stage in our lives and we all experience things so differently. But when we're real and we're honest and we're open about how we're really feeling, particularly with God, that's what gives him the room to move. So that's beautiful. Thank you. Bridie, we'd love to hear a little bit more from you now and a little bit about how you've experienced true joy. And it's a joy that you've explained to me, which has just been so beautiful, as a joy that can only be found in Christ. Can you share with us a bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure. I guess in recent years there was a 5-year period where I went through some things that were completely out of my control, and so probably caused a bit of struggle at times in finding that joy. I had these seizure-like episodes, and within that period there was on one occasion where I had like 8 in a row and I was vomiting unconscious, and they actually caught a 10-second flatline, so it turned out that my heart was actually stopping during them. They're like, well, probably shouldn't just like see if your heart starts again. You're probably not a good idea. So I ended up with a pacemaker. I was the only person on the ward that didn't have grey hair and false teeth. But then I also had a miscarriage, and then following that there was also a missed miscarriage, and it was this bizarre thing I'd never heard of, which is called a molar pregnancy. And so if cells are left in your body, it can actually cause tumours through your body. And so I'm like, well, do I grieve the loss of a baby that wasn't really a baby? It was just these bizarre cells, and then, you know, ongoing testing to make sure it doesn't cause the cancer. And then probably the most challenging thing out of all in that period was when my mum, who was the fittest person I knew, she used to literally drag me up hills. I think there's a photo of her. And she was so healthy, she was so full of faith, she was so vibrant, and she was having treatment for, going to a GP for 6 months and no result. And then we took her to another doctor, and within a week she was in hospital and diagnosed with cancer. And she chose never to hear her prognosis, and she was just so full of faith that she just wholeheartedly believed for her healing, and so she didn't want to hear words spoken over her. So I sat in a room. Mum wasn't married and at the time, and I was the oldest of the siblings. So I sat in a room, and the doctors told me that without treatment she was expected to have 3 months to live, and with treatment a year. Damn it. And so I guess I felt hugely responsible because she didn't know that. And so following that, she had stem cell transplant. She had every kind of chemo and drug and radiation under the planet possible. She had tumours that actually were these gaping wounds in her skin. She had more broken bones than I can count because the cancer was in her bones, including 4 broken vertebrae on 2 occasions. And she was this stunning, strong woman that her vertebrae would literally just compact, collapse. She lost 4 inches of height just from vertebrae disappearing, pretty much. And I remember being at her house one day, and life had changed so much because my life was now about constant hospital appointments and being surrounded by these people with just heart-wrenching stories. And I'd never experienced really anxiety in my life, and I was just gripped by anxiety because I was just constantly what's coming next, and constantly hearing all this tragic stuff. And I remember being at Mum's house one day, and I had a 2-week-old baby, and I'd been up all night feeding, and at this stage Mum had broken vertebrae and she needed 24-hour care between my sister and I. And so after being up all night at 7 o'clock, I'd be over at her house and taking the meals that I'd prepared for myself in the freezer and trying to look after a crying baby and a mum that literally couldn't move an inch in the bed without screaming in pain. And I went home that day and I stood in the shower and I just remember questioning God, and I was like, I know you can heal her and we've seen you do miracles throughout this time, and I don't understand why you're not healing her, and it's so hard to trust you at the moment and so hard to trust that you're sovereign, and all those questions that you have when you're confronted with things that are so challenging. And I think God welcomes those questions. I think that's why the book of Psalms is in the Bible, to show us that it's okay to question and to ask him those things, and that it's better to run to him with the questions than from him. But I remember standing there in the shower at the end of that day when I got home, and tears just streaming down my face and asking these questions, but then choosing to say, God, you are good, you only do good, and you work all things for my good. And I didn't feel like it, and what I was seeing didn't display it at the time, but I knew that I had to make that declaration of faith and to stand on the truth of what I knew to be right. And I guess it was a statement of saying that what I knew about Jesus was bigger than what I didn't know about the circumstances, and who I knew him to be was greater than what I didn't know and what I didn't understand. And I'd grown up a Christian, but I'd heard about the cross and I knew about the cross here, but I didn't really have an understanding of it here. It had never really been personal to me. It was sort of like this fact that was out there, but didn't have any personal implication to me. And I remember in my 20s, it just, I don't even know what changed, but it became the most deeply personal thing to me, just the thing that held me through everything. And I think through that season when things were really hard, my greatest joy was found in who Jesus was, but actually what he'd already done for me. The fact that he loved me so much, that he'd given his life for me, that he'd forgiven me, that what he'd sacrificed for me, and when that's what holds you, then everything else can be taken from you, but your joy can't be stolen because it's rooted in Jesus and who he is and what he's already done, and nothing can ever change that. And so for me, I think I said to Nicole, I'm like, it sounds like a cliche, and I don't know, how do I sit up there and say that, but I guess it's the truth. And when you sit there and you watch your mum's lungs fill with fluid and you hear her breathing like that and you watch her pass away, it can't be a cliche anymore. It's got to be the truth, and it's only the truth that will hold you through those seasons. And that's what I found to be the truth, Jesus, and the joy that's in him and the joy in what he's already done for me. But I found that joy is not a feeling, but it's a focus. and that what you focus on, you feed, and what you feed is what grows in your life. And so through that season and through feeling that anxiety, and I know so many people feel anxiety for so many different reasons, I really had to be intentional in choosing what I focused on. And I know Kim shared this verse before, and I love that she did, because it's something that there were so many things in Philippians 4 that held me through that time. But it talks about whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And I found in that season that I actually had to filter my thoughts. I had to choose my focus, because there were so many negative things that I could focus on. But I actually had to choose every day to stand in thankfulness and to find what to be grateful for, because when you're grateful and when you're thankful, it actually magnifies the goodness and the greatness of God, and it feeds and it grows the joy in your life. And so I choose to focus on, being thankful that I had a mum for all those years who was amazing, and being thankful that Jesus actually understood my pain. Like, he actually understood feeling let down. He understood submitting to God's sovereignty, and to the point of death. He understood going through huge physical trials. And so choosing my focus in that season was probably the hugest thing, even to the point of choosing not to watch certain TV shows and have certain conversations, because I already just felt like there was so much heaviness. So I guess my encouragement would just be, I know some people here have maybe never thought about Jesus and his death on the cross and whether it's relevant to them. And probably some of us have so much that we become complacent with it and it just becomes this fact. But I guess just asking the Holy Spirit to make sure that that's something that is revealed to you as something so deeply personal, because it'll hold your joy in every season.
Thanks, Bridie. I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to know these women over this experience, and it's been amazing. And I know when Bridie and I got together and she said that to me about it being cliche, I said to her, it's not cliche, because I actually think this is real for us right now. I know myself, I lived as a Christian for a long time, not really understanding the power of the cross and not really understanding what the sacrifice was. Like Bridie said, you can know it, but there's a difference between knowing it and knowing it. And I shared a little bit about that in my journaling session. But you know how we talk about this awakening? Like, people are talking about the awakening. I think the awakening is about us. We keep on looking out, and we keep on looking out and seeing, the awakening, it's the awakening. God wants to awaken us before he can take it to the next step and awaken this nation, because there's so many of us that are still crying out for that revelation of God's love. Not this revelation. And that's what sets people free. And that's what's powerful. So keep on seeking God on that. Beautiful, Mel. So excited we get to share a couch together. Can you share with us now, for you, hearing these two stories, you've got something different to share, because right now you're smack bang in the middle of grasping God and experiencing his joy in a really tough season. And I know when we caught up and you said to me, I'm going to be pretty real. And I said, go for it. That's exactly what we need. All masks off. And that's what today's about. All masks off. Let's be real. Because as we're real with God, he can be real to us. So will you share with us now?
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm absolutely delighted. I'm very vocal about my desire to share from a place of vulnerability and honesty. I think it's so important that as women we connect from that level. But as Nicole mentioned, I'm sharing from a different place today, because I find that often we share retrospectively about the struggles that we've faced. It's much easier. It's so much less confronting to share when we're through it. But I'm smack bang in the midst of it right now. Just to provide a little bit of context for you, I grew up in a pretty challenging and toxic home environment. So my dad was an alcoholic and my mum had some pretty serious mental health issues. And as you can imagine, the combination of those two didn't sort of offer much in the way of a nurturing, harmonious, happy household. It was a non-Christian family, but I had a sense that God was with me from a very early age. I didn't actually know that it was God, but as I was older and was exposed to the gospel, I learnt the stories and instantly recognised that that was the presence that I felt, and that was who was with me through the very dark days that I was experiencing at home. And it genuinely carried me through into the early years of adulthood when, to be honest, I was quite broken. I'd experienced pretty significant childhood trauma, and I was a bit of a shell of a person embarking on adulthood. But that seed of faith was very real within me, and I was able to connect with a beautiful church community in Geelong, where I would say that I received that nurture and care that in a very real and practical way that I hadn't received earlier on. I was fortunate enough to meet my husband and fall in love and have a beautiful experience of gentle and kind and nurturing love. And our two beautiful kids came along later. I had a very strong I developed a very strong faith. I had some wonderful ministry and missions opportunities over the years. I had an extremely fulfilling career. I had a harmonious home that was everything that I'd ever desired, and I felt as though the plans and purpose that God had promised for me were absolutely being fulfilled. Then on December 4 last year, the day started like any other. I was getting up and heading off to work in the morning. My kids fortunately had gone with their nan because I was heading off to work, and as you can see, there's a picture about to come on the screen. I apologise, it's quite graphic. But when I was 4 doors from home, this is what happened. I was hit by a drugged driver who was travelling at 130 kilometres in a 40k zone. I could never have imagined the force of that kind of impact. And what you saw was when the jaws of life were about to be used to cut me out of the car. I was trapped for almost an hour and my life was literally on the balance. I heard later on that the paramedics didn't expect that I was going to survive that situation. Praise God, I'm here to tell this story today. Absolutely. But I was broken. So to give you a bit of a sense of the injuries that I sustained, my ankle was very badly crushed. I had a broken leg. My pelvis was severely crushed. I broke my spine in 4 places, broke my sacrum, broke 4 ribs, I broke my wrist, I had internal bleeding, I had cuts, I needed stitches from one end to the other, I had bruising like you'd never seen, and I was very, very badly broken. When my kids first visited me in hospital on the trauma ward in Melbourne, my youngest didn't actually recognise me because I was, like I say, I can't use any other word than broken. It wasn't just physically, but at that point it was actually emotionally as well. I spent 4.5 months in hospital, and at the time I had a 2-year-old and a recently turned 6-year-old. The experience of being away from them and of knowing that my kids were experiencing trauma as a result of something that happened to me, after what I'd gone through, it felt like it was almost God letting me down. I hate to think of it in that light, but I honestly thought that this was not the plan or purpose that God had for my life, and I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. And in some ways, I want to be really honest, I still don't understand because it's a really tough journey. I've been ripped out of everything that I was doing, and I feel quite redundant sometimes. I can't mother the way that I was. I can't work at the moment. I spend all of my time in rehabilitation. I've recently started leaving my wheelchair in the car and walking on crutches, but I've spent nearly a year now in a wheelchair, and I do struggle to understand the point of this. But when I look at a verse, actually Kim referenced it this morning in James, where it's chapter 1, verse 2, and he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy." And I think that it's the opportunity that I'm looking to now. I don't know how God is going to use this experience, but I'm convinced that it's going to be used for positive. I'm absolutely certain that in much the same way as my early formative years were challenging and I had to overcome some pretty significant trauma there, it's held me in good stead for some wonderful ministry opportunities over the years. I was talking with Bridie earlier actually about the opportunities I've had to sit with people in prison over many years, or sit with women involved in street-based sex work, and sitting in gutters and chatting with them, things that I probably could never have had the required empathy for unless I'd experienced what I had it in my early years. And I'm imagining that perhaps this is some of what I'm going through now. I'll have a new understanding and a new empathy and a new way to connect with people and show the love of God through that. But on joy, I mentioned to Nicole, I absolutely feel joy every single day. From the moment the accident happened, I knew it was a good news story. All I could feel was gratitude that I was alive and that I got to continue on this path that God had in store for me. People who came and visited me, sometimes they were angry, sometimes they were, grieving for me and for what had happened. But honestly, joy for me was what reigned through. I don't feel a lot of happiness day to day. I'm pretty deep down in PTSD at the moment, and I've got a lot of pain from my injuries, and things aren't ideal. But absolutely, my joy sustains.
That's amazing. What a woman, hey? When Mel and I spoke, she just used the word redundant, and I spoke to her a little while ago, and I said, you don't know the amount of times, just with me coming and saying hi and sitting on the couch with her and just having conversations, how much she has spoken into my life. God is always using us in every situation, and sometimes we have this idea that it needs to be a certain way, but sitting in the lounge room at your house with our children running around being crazy, God has used you in my life, and I know there's people here that He has used you greatly. So don't believe that as a truth in your life, because that's a lie. You are not redundant, and God will use you in mighty ways. We've got a couple of questions starting to come in. I encourage you to send some more. We will not have time to get through all of them. We're going to keep on going though, and I've got another question for you, Julie. A lot of mums and even grandmas might be in the room today that are desperate to see their loved ones come to know the Lord. And I know for you that we've had a little bit of a chat about this, and you've been on your own journey with your boys coming to faith and what that's looked like. Could you share with us a little bit about your journey with watching your boys coming to know the Lord?
Yeah, sure. When I found out that our youngest, Josh, was another boy, after being told he was a girl, by the way, and after having people give me pink things and prophesying pink things over me, he was a boy. Just as a side note, I went from, if anyone knows Melbourne, I went from Box Hill Hospital to my husband's office in Eltham, bawling my eyes out because I just discovered we were having our fourth son, and launched into the middle of some very important pastoral meeting that Dave was in, bawling, just not consolable at all. And he looked at me and went, okay, I think I need to come out with you, don't I? I think this would be a good time to go outside the room. And we walked outside the room, and the first thing he said to me, this is how upset I was, the first thing he said to me was, what's wrong with the baby? Because that's how upset I was. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just a boy. But then I had a very wise friend who said to me, wow, God must have incredible plans for you. He must think so highly of you if he has given you 4 sons to raise into godly men. No pressure. So to answer your question, Nick, when the boys were really little, like that picture on the couch, I had absolutely no doubt in my mind that they were all going to walk with the Lord. Of course they would, because they've got a pastor for a dad and a mum like me, and of course that's the way our path is going to go. All of our kids are just going to walk with the Lord. And at different points in our family life, that has not been the case, particularly for our eldest son, Daniel. He's 22, He lives in Melbourne and he is not walking with the Lord right now. And it's really, really hard to watch your child step into a life that is contrary to the way in which you have raised them. I want to tell you a quick story, if I can, about Reuben again. Gosh, he got into a lot of trouble, that boy. But it's quite significant, actually. I thought how interesting that in preparation for this, that the two stories that have given me pause to think about joy have both involved him. So I've kind of reflected on that. I think I need to kind of dig into that a bit deeper. He wanted to go to a party in Torquay and he's about 16. So we said, sure, that's okay. You can go to the party. Not a big fan of parties, but he went. And we said, we will be in Torquay to pick you up at midnight. Okay, cool. There's our plan. However, Mum and Dad got a bit tired and decided that picking up at Torquay at midnight was probably going to be a little bit too late. So we decided that we would go a little bit early. So we text to say, we're coming a bit early, sorry, we're tired. We get this text back and it says, I'm not going to be in Torquay at that time. Okay, so if you're not going to be in Torquay, where exactly are you now? I'm in Anglesey. Okay, all right, okay, Torquay to Anglesey, all right. I'm not going to ask you why. We'll come to Anglesey to pick you up. Well, actually, I'm not actually in Anglesey either. Okay, so where are you now then? Okay, so we live in Port Arlington, right? He says, I'm in Aireys Inlet. Now, Aireys Inlet is a good 2.5 hour one-way trip from Port Arlington that we had to do at midnight. So you can appreciate that by the time Dave went to pick him up, by the time we got home, number one, it was a very quiet trip home, but number two, it was a very late night. But that is the joy of parenting, isn't it? This is what you do. The reason why I tell you that story is because the hardest thing as a parent is to watch your children walk into a life in which you know is not going to bring the result that you have trained them for. But the gift of that path for them is recognising when they get to the point where it's not working, oh, hang on a minute, this is not how I thought my life was going to go. The gift is for them in that space when they then have their own encounter with Jesus, when they have that breakthrough moment, when they realise that the only way back is through the cross, which is what Bridie was talking about. So I guess for us, we've tried to love our kids unconditionally without expectation that they are actually going to choose the life that we've taught them to lead. It's really hard, but I think as parents, we have to do that. And the lesson in that for us is recognising that when I'm not with my kids, Jesus always is. So it didn't matter that Reuben was in Aireys Inlet. It didn't matter that we weren't there with him because Jesus was there with him. And in the process of, particularly for Scoobs, bringing him back to God, that story is quite pivotal in his life. Can I keep going or am I going to take up too much time?
No, that's fine. If you feel like you need to keep going, that's great.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's good.
No, thank you. That's great. Bridie, today we're going to move back to you because you've talked about trust, and I love that you shared that joy is more than a feeling, it's a focus. And I know when you told me that, I was like, oh, there's a great sermon right there. It's just there's so much in that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how trusting God has been so important to you? And you also have shared about the whole concept of control, and I know Kim's touched on that, and it's probably something that there's a lot of people in this room that would struggle with. Can you share a little bit about how you've managed to surrender control to experience more of God's peace and joy in your life?
I think I'm one of those people, I like to call it organised. My husband may call it a control freak, who knows. But, I like to have structure and I like to have the boxes ticked and everything, and the plan for the plan for the plan. And I guess if I go back to the story of when Mum was unwell, like doctors missing the diagnosis and then missing, that she had a compressed spinal cord and almost couldn't walk, and her not knowing her results or diagnosis, like I was consumed by this thing that I had to try and be in control, and I had to try and fix everything, and I had to try and preempt everything, and it just, like I said, leads to anxiety and to trying to control something that's completely out of your control anyway. And I mean, even we can relate to this in day-to-day things, like it happens constantly. Even as a mum, you know, you're trying to control and have everything right and with kids. And I guess I got to the point where I was like, well, I'm not controlling it anyway. And I feel like we heard last night, you know, that joy is like this river, and it's a fruit of the Holy Spirit, and there's a never-ending supply available. But I feel like my control in my life has often been like that kink in the hose. Like you grip so tightly that it actually stops the flow of what God wants to bring in your life. Like it stops the flow of the joy and the peace and everything that he wants to bring to our situation. And I don't know if any of you have ever had to be rescued by a lifeguard. I'm not talking about where you fake it because they're hot and you want this, but actually rescued because you're drowning. I've never done that, by the way. No, I haven't. Julie doesn't believe me. But I'm talking about when someone actually has to be rescued because they're drowning. You know, the thing that can actually affect the success of that rescue is not whether the rescuer is able to, because they've been trained to, like they're ready to do that, but it's actually whether the person being rescued is prepared to surrender. Because often people that are drowning are like grab at everything that comes past them, and they actually start to pull them underwater, and they are flailing around, and they're actually the ones that stop that rescue being successful. And so, I don't know, in life I now, very unsuccessfully often, but I try to have that stance of complete surrender. Like if I'm being rescued and I'm in the water, you know, just if you lie back and you're completely still and you completely let go and you completely surrender to the skills and to the strength of the person rescuing you, that's when the rescue is successful. When there's complete surrender. And so that's what I try and go back to in my life, not trying to be the father of the house, but allowing my heavenly Father to be the father and taking on the role of the child rather than trying to flip it around.
That's great.
Still learning though.
How awesome is it that our lifeguard is Jesus, by the way? He rescues us every time. Thanks, Bridie. Mel, again, I just want to thank you for being so open and honest and vulnerable. You know, sometimes we can try and look like we've got it all together. You know, we've talked a lot about that this weekend, and I think some walls have been broken down, which is so fantastic. Can you just share with us a little bit more about how you are currently experiencing joy? You said that you are every day, and for some people they're sitting there thinking, how are you experiencing joy with everything that's going on? And if you would like to just share with us how you personally are making joy your focus.
Yeah, absolutely. What I've learned is that joy is cultivated through gratitude. If I choose to focus on all of the things that I have to be grateful for, that absolutely leads to joy. But I've noticed that it's a very, you talked about intentional focus, it's a very intentional process for me. Each day I can think about the fact that I've not had a lot of sleep and that I'm repeatedly getting triggered, or I can choose to look at all of the things that I still have, all of the things I can still do, all of the things that are still ahead of me, and be eternally grateful but also joyful about those promises. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 16 to 18, Paul talks about rejoicing always. It's a very familiar verse, but when you actually dig into it, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. So I give thanks that I survived. I give thanks that I wasn't, that my spine was broken, but my cord wasn't severed. I give thanks for so many things, even though ideally none of this would have happened.
That's great. Now, there's a couple of questions that are coming in, and some of them have actually already been answered. Keep sending them through. Obviously, we'll get to as many as we can. But, Bridie, I'm going to start with you. And the first question I've got is, how do you cope with people constantly asking you how you are, especially when you're actually really not okay?
I know that it was something that Mum really struggled with throughout the time that she was unwell, but I just think transparency, like I think I'll backtrack a bit, but we have this Connect group, and it actually started out of a group of friends in Alpha, and I know pastors aren't meant to say it, but I haven't always loved Connect groups. But I actually find this one really refreshing because it started out of the foundation, come as you are and be as you are. Like, if you think it's a load of crap, because you said crap, we're allowed to say it, right? If you think it's a load of crap, just say it. And that's kept that culture. And I think often in the church world, we feel like we've got to put this facade on, this mask on, and everything's got to be okay, and we've got to give the right answer and praise Jesus. And I'm not talking about like constantly dumping on people, but being transparent. Like, I think that's what I love about our Connect group, because they kept that culture. They say it as it is. They come as they are. And Jesus was always about come as you are. It wasn't about go and fix it and get it right and then come. He was always about come as you are. And so giving ourselves permission to be honest about where we're at and how we feel, but also not feeling that we have to overshare with everyone, obviously. Choosing the right people with wisdom. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. I think it's our Australian culture as well. Does anyone find you'll be out walking and you'll say to someone, hi, how you going? Yep. But you've just walked past them
thanks.
in 2 seconds. Yeah. You don't really have time. You don't really even want to know how they are. Imagine if we stopped everyone as they said, how are you? And went, well, how long have you got? So it's even being conscious of thinking, should I have this conversation? Should I ask this person how I am, when sometimes I'm not really even wanting to know how they are, I'm just saying hi. And I have this picture of always and I say it to my husband, imagine if we stopped and answered that for everyone when we walked around the river. Imagine how long it would take us to get around the river. Because often you'll have 10 people say, how you going? How you going? So I think it's a good one for us to, obviously, like you just said, some people, be real, be deep, be open. But other people, choose your boundaries. Boundaries are really important to make sure that you're giving people that are the right people permission to speak into your life.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's people, when you've got those boundaries in place, that don't need to know everything. So that's great. Mel, I've got a couple of questions coming through for you. And this one here, I think, is really something that a lot of women would actually be asking. And where does forgiveness sit in your experience or focus on joy through your grieving and your healing?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting question. At the moment, we're in the midst of the court case, and I'm learning more about the person who caused the accident. And I'm learning that he's not remorseful. He has no real recognition of the damage that he's caused. And even if he did, it's not something that seems to resonate for him. But all along for me, for one thing, I was inspired by my daughter, actually. My daughter, in the beginning, she's quite the little prayer warrior, and it's adorable coming from a 6-year-old. And she always prayed not only for me but for him. She had that grace in her heart to recognise that he also needed prayer. But for me, I've decided it's not for me to carry that situation. I'm handing that over because I can't deal with his actions. I can't deal with the situation that he's in. It's not mine to handle. Does that mean I'm successful every day? No. And if he pleads not guilty, I'll have to go through the trauma of being a witness on the stand and testifying as to what happened, and I'm sure that will be extremely challenging, and he has a choice to prevent me from having to go through that. So we'll see, but it's a daily process, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for your honesty again. Julie, I've got another question for you, and this, I think, is something as particularly for women that there's a real juggle with this, and you've shared that you're a mother of 4 and you're out the other end now. How did you get the balance right between ministry and parenting? Because I think sometimes there's this idea that, well, I'm a mum, this is what I'm doing at the moment, this is my season, but I think God's always calling us into ministry, not up the front ministry. There's life ministry that he's always calling us into. So can you share with us just quickly as our last question?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because trying to raise your kids in a fishbowl is really hard, because there is sometimes, not all the time, but there is sometimes an expectation that I think I certainly felt that the kids had to behave a certain way, you know, and then on the flip side of that, you know, oh, the pastor's kids, you know, you got to watch out for those pastor's kids, they're always the worst. You know, just those kind of funny things and silly things that people say. So it's, you know, it's okay to say those things. It's how I respond to them that's the key. But I think for me, I often say to some of the young mums that I work with now or hang out with now is just keep the main thing the main thing. We can get a little bit hung up on what's God calling me to, you know, what's the right plan for my life. Just keep the main thing the main thing. And for me, that was about making sure that I was in a place of submitted heart and surrender to God and obedience before sacrifice and all of those things. That kept me in balance in my life. And I think for me also, with an incredibly supportive husband who was very much willing to, at times, let go of things that he'd been called to do so that I could step up to the things that God had called me to do. So it worked both ways for us, which has been really, really pleasant. I don't think we didn't always get the balance right. I don't know that we ever do get the balance right. But I think if you can keep the main thing, and that is, do you want me to do this, Lord? Is this what you have for me, God? You know, look for the signs in your kids. If you're too busy, if you're not busy enough. I mean, we always said to our kids, Sunday's it. Sunday morning, this is what we do. We go to church. We made a decision not to engage in weekend sporting activities, which, as you can imagine, with 4 boys, that was really hard to try and find other things for them to do midweek so that we weren't occupied on the weekend. Because we knew that if we engaged, you know, with footy and cricket, that would mean as a family on a Sunday and on a Saturday with 4 boys, if they chose to do that sport, we were going to be going in opposite directions. And that was not healthy for us as a family. But it also didn't model to our kids, this is how you set aside time for God in your week. This is how you do it. And so keeping the main thing is probably the answer to that question.
What we'll do is, because there are still another couple of questions coming through, I do feel like most of them have been answered, but we will pass on the questions to the panel members. And, you know, if you feel like even after today's conference you want to come and have a chat, I'm sure that these ladies would love to talk to you, pray with you, and just be available for you. They're here to bless you because God's given them each something to share. There's something that we want to do that we really believe as a leadership team is really important. When we were throwing around names and Mel's name came up, I felt like this was actually not just about what Mel could give us, but it was also about what we could do for Mel. So we're going to do something today and we're going to be really bold, and we're actually going to pray for Mel, and we're going to stand together as a congregation of women and unite, stand together and actually pray and believe for healing for her. Mel actually has some serious breaks still in her pelvis. If they put that picture of the x-ray up, there's some screws you'll be able to see, and then there's also in the top, you're looking at it on the left, there's a lack of bone growth in that area. Mel, you might be a little bit better at explaining this than me.
I do know a thing or two about it, actually. It's funny you mentioned that. Apparently your pelvis is important. It's pretty much the thing that anchors your entire framework. And for me, the back section of my pelvis is missing quite a significant part of bone. And that's because it was so badly broken that it essentially splintered and was removed. So the screw that you saw at the top is what's holding me together. It's not a long-term solution. I either need my bone to grow so that it bridges the gap, or I'm looking at bone grafts and further surgery. The surgery carries significant risks, and it's something that it's pretty daunting. It's something that I have spoken to a number of women about, including these lovely women on the panel, about my desire for this not to be the case, that I have significant surgery, all right, if we need to go there, that's okay. But I do not want further complications. I don't want this to have control of my life. And I'm believing today that as a group we can, I'm honoured that you could stand with me and believe that that's not going to be the future for my situation.
Mel, you mentioned obviously that Kim's a dear friend of yours, and I'm going to invite
She's
her.
all right. Kim used to actually visit me in hospital. She was so gracious. She would visit me weekly and complain about her sore feet. She would say, look, Mel, I know it's hard for you to imagine, but I've been on my feet all week.
You don't understand. I had sore arches.
Look, it was difficult for me to empathise, and I did appreciate that you shared that with me at the time. It was super helpful.
Actually, it's really good if you've got a friend who's like laid up in bed. Like, they're an absolutely captive audience for your complaining.
Didn't you take advantage of that?
I did notice a few times like she's dinging the nurse button.
A medical emergency.
We're on dangerous ground right now because we have 3 active mics and Kim and I both have one each.
And Mel has the other one.
And there's a reason why they don't let that happen, ladies. There's a reason why they don't let that happen. So would you guys stand with me?
Yeah.
Do you guys believe in prayer? Yeah, I do too. So we are going to pray now, and I want you where you are to pray. I want you to pray wherever you are, pray however you want. Reach out your hands if that's something that you want to do, and we'll be happy to send out updates if people want updates about this amazing woman, and we look forward to hearing of a story of a miracle that God is going to do in her life.